Well, when I was a little girl in the 40s, the only poetry that I encountered in elementary school was English poetry because, people didn't know enough about it. And the first poem I learned to recite was, "In Flanders fields the poppies grow between the crosses, row on row." However, the next line is, "That mark our place." And that was the first time I discovered that the poem didn't need to constantly rhyme at the end of the line like Jack and Jill went up the hill, but that one could say, "In Flanders fields the poppies grow between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place." And it was that drew me to poetry because it was like music. And I had already been studying music since I was 4. And so there was something that was very attractive to me about that. I might have been 8 or 9 years old. That was that. Well, regarding poetry and prose and how one influences the other, there's a very interesting essay that my correspondent and good friend Helene Dorn sent me. I think it's by Ursula Le Guin, and it's called "The Reciprocity of Poetry and Prose." And I have always used that as a guide, and basically there were various inputs from various writers, and what I remember Gary Snyder saying, which proved to be very important, was that poetry just has denser, tighter images, and prose looser, but they really are sort of on a continuum in a certain way, and that I do believe that prose writers who begin to read poetry, and I find that they seldom do that, they begin to see how important the individual image is in the making of a sentence. When you read poetry, you begin to leave out all the extraneous words in a prose piece and learn how to edit yourself. Oh, you have to learn to edit yourself ruthlessly. You really do have to learn to be your own best critic. But the reading of poetry sharpens your association with what is the telling word. I don't mean telling as opposed to showing, but what is the crucial word in this sentence, and how to build your phrases so that the crucial words pack the punch of the sentence. And that's something you get from reading. You have to read elegant poetry and you have to read elegant prose, and then just to be your own worst enemy and second guess yourself constantly forever and ever and ever. When I first read a poem, I generally read the whole poem because most of the time I'm reading something new, unless it's something I dearly love and have to read over and over. But if it attracts my attention, and if it speaks to me in a certain kind of way, I'll just stop, but I generally go through the whole poem first. And then I will read over and over again the parts that I really like, and think about them, and then read the whole thing again. If I get enraptured by something, I will just keep reading it, and generally, I like to read poems in the morning when I have a very blank mind, and poems are like an awakening of the spirit for me. That's my first response to a poem. What do I look for? I look for things that I respond to emotionally, or in a narrative poem, like some of the poems by someone like Philip Levine, who writes such marvelous narrative poems and can tell a story in just a few lines that will take any reader, immediately suck a reader right in. Then I'm just enraptured, because the images are generally so visual in a good poem that you can almost see the poem happening in your mind. And I just find that an incredible seduction. So diving into a poem, I was kind of impressed by the image, but because that would be very nice if one could just dive into it. But it depends. You know, poetry happens in so many different ways to me. It can happen when I'm reading in the morning, reading a poem, and something occurs to me, something inspires me from something that I have read. Or I can have an idea while I'm sitting at my desk, and then I keep it in my mind. And of course I used to write out everything by hand, but if my computer is on and I'm just, all I have to do is turn to it, I then will type the words that as I'm thinking them, and then it's just a question of going as far as I can go before I lose my train of thought. And then I have something where there was nothing before, and that's the beginning. But that's only the beginning. No one should ever rest on that and consider it a poem, because it's usually not. Sometimes if I recite it aloud, I'll give you a wonderful example. Every year I write a New Year's poem, and I was reciting it to my daughter and son-in-law as we were driving. And I have two daughters and two sons-in-law, so this particular son-in-law is a musician and a musicologist, and he really liked the ending. And then I realized that I liked the ending so much that I could just throw out the beginning. And you have to have a lot of courage and experience to do that. So what I always suggest to people is, if it's going to pain you a lot to get rid of it, just put it in a save file. It will be there forever for you to raid it. But save the part that you really like the best, even if it's the end of what you wrote. And then you can go back to that and build on it, and maybe you'll want to write a different and new beginning. And but the process differs in all aspects, because one thing or another can inspire a poem. It can simply be the way you feel on a particular day, or hearing music, or hearing a different sound. So you have to have a mind that is free of distraction, that is open to everything, and that's not easily come by. As we all know, we have lives. Usually to edit a poem, I make up my mind, okay, now I'm going to work on my poetry. And I read the ones that are pretty much done first, because that gives me great confidence. And then I get to the problem poem that's just beginning or still unformed, and I make a few changes, and then I try not to go overboard. Well, one thing that I find very crucial is that I do not ever throw away the first piece of paper on which that poem exists. So if people work solely on computers, it's a different story, because unless you see things side by side, you can't edit the same way as you can on a piece of paper, where you can scratch something out in pencil, and then you can erase it, and then you can rewrite it, and then you can erase it again. And then you can go through that, but, and this goes for prose as well. Do not ever throw away the first thing you write of a piece, because that's where the something comes from in here to out there, and you don't want to lose that because it's the original impetus. And it's very important in poetry, because you have only those few words that came from you to out there, and even if you mess with them a lot, what I do is I simply clip together sheets of paper, and then I heard or read that Sylvia Plath did the same thing, that she kept all of her versions of everything, and this is, of course, this in the days before one had any kind of computer or anything, and then gradually built on things, and then that allows you to go backwards if something is not working the way you thought it might have at first. And you have the original rhythm that you can follow. So that's very, very important, I find. But I don't want anyone to see them. Oh, you asked, what's your favorite poem? And I can't imagine what would it be like to select a favorite poem from among all. That would be like choosing a favorite child if you had a lot of children and selecting one to the detriment of the others. Oh, how sad that would be. But I do have one that I like very, very much, and I borrowed the title from Stevie Wonder when I wrote it, and it was a very popular song called Hotter Than July, 1982. Only the messengers and me out riding on 90-degree Fifth Ave this morning. A young man shakes a stop sign to get my attention. Is it my hair braided and wound, the purple shirt, the silver in my ears, or all these years of dodging traffic and compliments? Anyway, happy and 48 now, sweat-stained, weaving among cars. I hope I die like this, looking good and moving fast. I forgot to say that was about my bicycle.